Hey, thanks for joining us and welcome to The Story. I'm Blair Best. If you're watching our show tonight, either live or later, chances are the amount you pay for electricity is going up next year. Both Portland General Electric and Pacific Power requested double-digit rate increases earlier this year, and that comes after big hikes in recent years. But we're going to focus on PGE because of an interesting exchange that happened late last month, illuminating why some critics blame big tech and power-hungry data centers for driving up power bills for the rest of us. It's our big story tonight. In November, Oregon Senator Ron Wyden sent a letter to PGE's CEO asking for specifics on why they needed a rate hike next year when rates have already risen 40% since 2020. The CEO Maria Pope responded, explaining some of the reasons behind their rate increases. Basically, the purchasing and production costs of power to keep going up at the same time that the company is investing in infrastructure upgrades and cleaner energy. She also mentioned some major weather events like the 2020 Labor Day fires, the 2021 heat dome, and a couple of big ice storms. But in the last few years, demand for power has been surging, and that increased demand is not happening among all customers equally. Pope says the fastest growing area for demand, which they call load growth, is in the high-tech sector. PGE is experiencing a surge in requests for new substantial amounts of electricity load, including from advanced manufacturing, data centers, and AI-related companies. Pope provided numbers that really illustrate what this all means. Between 2019 and 2023, overall demand for electricity grew 10%. In the 10 years before that, growth was only 2.8%. But again, growth was not equal among customer types. In the last 5 years, residential customers saw growth of 6.4%. Commercial customers grew 1.9%. But industrial power deliveries, the data centers and tech manufacturing facilities, grew a whopping 34.7%. Those numbers alone paint quite a picture of power use. But let's zoom out a little bit and talk about data centers. They're basically big warehouses filled with computer servers that are humming night and day to power the services for different internet companies like Google and Facebook. You may have noticed that we are in something of an AI gold rush. Because of that, the tech industry needs data centers now more than ever, and Oregon is a prime destination for them. The Oregonian reported in October that data centers already account for an estimated 11% of Oregon's power consumption, more than twice as much as all the homes in Portland. And that number is expected to at least double by the end of the decade. Now, according to the think tank Electric Power Research Institute, Oregon is among the 5 highest states in the nation for data center power demand. By 2030, they anticipate data centers will account for over 24% of Oregon's power consumption. PGE's Maria Pope acknowledged that regulations for how costs are handled between different types of customers will, quote, will need to evolve. And the company is working on that with the Oregon Public Utility Commission, or PUC. But when it comes to the next year's rate hike, PGE told us in a statement that, quote, large customer growth is not a significant driver of rate increases to date. Like Pope said in her letter, the company said those rate increases are because of the rise in power purchasing costs and infrastructure investments. Now, when we asked the PUC, they said essentially the same thing, that a rate increase would not be driven by costs that we have traced back to new large load data center customers. In fact, Pope claimed in her letter that the increase in demand for power driven by industrial customers actually helps affordability for everyone. Because the more people using the grid, the more the costs to operate the grid are spread out. But critics argue that the growth in data centers is making our power bills more expensive, partly through the upfront costs of hooking them up to the grid and getting them all the power they need. Here's Bob Jenks, executive director of a consumer watchdog group called the Oregon Citizens Utility Board, or CUB.
The idea that we sort of socialize and all people pay for load growth made sense because all customer classes were seeing load growth. But nowadays, we're only seeing the load growth happening really in the data center and the large industrial sector. And that's putting costs onto the system that when we now socialize those costs, it means everyone else is paying for the costs that the big data centers are putting in. PGE is doing all kinds of upgrades in its transmission system that seem to all be designed to get power into Hillsborough, to get more power into Hillsborough, and which is where all this data center load is. And the problem with that is those transmission upgrades then go into the transmission revenue requirement, which then spreads the cost among all classes of customers. Right now, PGE there has more data center load just in the city of Hillsborough than all the load of all residential customers in Washington County.
But Junk says it's not just the infrastructure costs. Most of the growth in residential customers over the last few years has been offset by advances in energy efficiency. So this big surge in overall demand is being driven by tech companies, just as Oregon is requiring cleaner and more expensive sources of power. Once upon a time, Junk says, most of our clean power needs in Oregon could be served by relatively cheap sources like hydropower. But as these industrial customers come online, it's no longer enough.
So all that load growth that's coming in has to come in at 100% clean. And that's problematic. You can do a lot in the summer with solar and batteries, but in the winter, what's the clean energy that's going to serve Facebook and facilities in the middle of January? If we have a couple days where the wind's not blowing, we don't have batteries that last that long. So the data centers are making us go out there and acquire more power and higher cost power. I mean, that just goes in and pushes everyone's rates up.
Now, one argument made in favor of things like data centers is that they provide a stable source of load. That is, they don't demand much more or less power at different times of the year. So power companies can better predict how much they need. That is not something that Jenks agrees with.
I think that's absurd. This is highly inflexible load. This is really difficult load to serve because it's going to be there at its significant level. It's 24 hours a day, 365 days a year at a pretty high level. They say it doesn't have a peak load. Well, I look at it, it's always a peak load. It's always really high and it's all the time.
The Oregonian reported Wednesday that the power industry is worried about rolling blackouts in the Northwest because data centers are driving demand for power up to the very limits that our grid can handle. The takeaway from these industry folks is that we need to invest more in our power infrastructure and sources of energy. And if you've learned anything when talking about power companies, when you hear the term invest more, many would argue that some of that cost will fall to you. Bringing things back to how we started in the segment now. In a new letter Senator Wyden sent to PGE CEO Maria Pope this week, he said it was vital that they have a, quote, shared commitment to do better in the future. And he outlined big takeaways from their exchange. Here are two of them, which are most relevant for the story we're telling. One, PGE will, beyond 2025, do everything possible to keep residential rate hikes below the rate of inflation. Number two, PGE will take every possible step to ensure that increases in industrial uses do not result in raising electricity rates for residential customers. Next week, we're expecting to learn more about PGE's requested rate increase for next year. A company spokesperson told us it will probably be in the neighborhood of 8%. And that's on top of the 40% of hikes we've seen in the past 4 years. We may also see some new developments in how PGE suggests regulating different customer types more fairly. According to some reporting by an energy industry publication called Clearing Up, PGE is exploring changes for big industrial customers, including charging them a mandatory minimum rate based on how much demand they put on the system and requiring them to sign a contract for service to ensure they're in it for at least 8 years. Bob Jenks says that he also expects to see lawmakers step in during the coming legislative session, which starts in late January. And we'll be watching. But in the meantime, what do you think about big tech, data centers, and your power bill? Email the story at kgw.com or call and leave us a voicemail at 503-226-5090. And if you'd like to take an even deeper dive on this topic, you can just check out our web story that's up now on kgw.com. All right, now that we've talked about the impact those data centers may have, we want to highlight the way the data powered in those hubs might be used, particularly when it comes to the world of journalism. The shuttering of legacy newspapers is nothing new, unfortunately. They've been facing financial hardship for years now, but what is new is someone reviving a dead newspaper with plagiarized articles from journalists who don't even live in this country through the use of artificial intelligence. That's exactly what appears to be happening with the Ashland Daily Tidings in Southern Oregon, according to our friends over at OPB. And we think this is worth your time. Ryan Hayes with Oregon's Public Broadcasting wrote this article titled "AI Slop is Already Invading Oregon's Local Journalism." In it, he explores the relatively new world of AI plagiarism, starting with the Tidings.
This story really started when I had some reporters come to me and say, "Hey, I saw this website. It looks like it's stealing my work and publishing it under someone else's name." So I, as an editor here, was like, well, I'm going to look into this and get this taken down, obviously. And as I started diving in, I just kept getting deeper and deeper, and the story got weirder and weirder. And what I found was that whoever's behind the Ashland Daily Tidings is taking stories from actual journalists in Oregon, not just Oregon Public Broadcasting, but everywhere, KGW, anywhere they can find stories, and spinning them through AI.
But Haas says it's not as simple as the platform taking other journalists' work word for word. Whoever is behind the resurrection of the Tidings added a layer of confusion, rewriting things slightly so it can't be traced back to the original article with a simple Google search. So who exactly is behind this AI zombie news source? The former owner of the Tidings, who still owns the trademark to the paper, tried to figure it out.
He told me that he had his lawyers reach out and research this very well-regarded national law firm, and they could not figure it out, and they believed it was coming from overseas. So they think some foreign company, some content mill or something overseas is like doing this, and there's just really no way to figure it out. I reached out to all of the staff members listed. I reached out to who they alleged the owners were. I reached out to the website and just could not figure out who was behind it or get someone to get back to me from the Ashland Daily Tidings.
Haas says this type of plagiarism can be dangerous, especially as AI becomes more prevalent, and can really mislead readers.
I mean, I think a lot of people are sort of hearing about artificial intelligence now and all the benefits it has and the potential to improve your work. And this is just sort of someone clearly pursuing some type of scam and just using these tools for negative purposes. Readers in Oregon need reliable news, they need reliable information, and they may not know. Some of these websites are starting to crop up. I've seen several other examples of different AI type things, not stolen identities, not as extreme as this, but AI type websites coming up and pretending to be news sources and stuff like that. So I think it's very important for readers to understand who's producing their news and really look into it. Find folks you can trust who are journalists working here and putting out reliable news, because there's a lot of fake stuff on the internet.
Ryan and his team put together a list of who owns all the media outlets in the state of Oregon. To look at that, as well as much more on this AI story, you can find the full article on opb.org. Well, coming up next on the story today, I went back to a spot in southeast Portland that I visited about 3 months ago. Neighbors are frustrated about homeless people staying in cars and RVs on their street. And the city said concrete barriers were on the way. Those barriers are nowhere to be found. And I work to find out why when the story returns. More troubling developments coming to light in the St. Helens School District amid an ongoing sex abuse scandal. 6 more staff members are now on paid leave. That now means a total of 10 people in the district are being investigated, including a choir teacher, principal, middle school teacher, and the superintendent. The district has not yet named the 6 other staff members. The district also had to bring in a new communications team to handle the ongoing crisis after the previous one resigned earlier this week, after it was revealed he was convicted of felony embezzlement charges in California back in July. All right, Devin Haskins joins me now. Devin, you have been covering this saga for weeks now. A lot going on in St. Helens. Help us break it down for us. What's the latest as of tonight?
So we're going to back it up just a little bit. This all started back in mid-November after the arrest of 2 teachers, one current, one former, both facing several charges of sex abuse involving a minor. Since that happened, we know that the principal's been criminally charged, also on leave, as well as the superintendent. Now there's 4 investigations. There's those criminal ones. There's an internal one being done by the district. There's also 2 state investigations.
Okay, I want to go back to that communications specialist that was just hired. You heard from her today. What'd she say?
She has a lot of experience with crisis communications. She's a former school district communications person, now owning her own firm that helps school districts navigate these challenging times, like St. Helens is in the process of doing. She talked about her credentials, but also mentioned the 4 investigations currently happening right now. Take a listen.
And for the last 20 or so years, I have had a small business supporting school districts in crisis communications and have worked closely with the Washington Association of School Administrators to support districts in a variety of critical issues. It's critical ultimately for the community to have confidence in what is learned. The investigations need to be impartial, they need to be thorough, and they need to be allowed to run their course without interference or undue speculation.
There's also another media briefing next Friday, as well as 2 community sessions, listening sessions, the district is holding with the parents and communities next week. That district investigation, they said, should be wrapped up within 60 days.
All right, Devin, thanks so much. We'll keep following this. All right, now to a street in Southeast Portland that has become somewhat of a magnet for people living in RVs and cars. Neighbors have been reporting the camp to the city for years, and we're told concrete barriers are on the way to prevent people from camping or parking there. That was 3 months ago. I went there today, and those barriers are nowhere to be seen as the camp continues to come and go. At first glance, this section of Southeast Knapp Street and Mount Scott Boulevard in Portland looks like any old road, but that's not always the case.
Tons of trash, needles, you name it, we had it down there.
It's become a well-known spot for people living in RVs. Here's what it looked like in August.
You know, it's just kind of out of the way, you know what I mean? And that's pretty much what most people in RVs want to do. They just want to be out of the way.
Just frustrated, just like, come on, city, let's get it, let's get on it.
Angie Toops runs a daycare out of her home nearby.
No, I would never take the kids on a walk or anything down there, too dangerous.
She's watched the camp come and go over the years.
Like every day, a new car, a new RV. So we were up, and I was calling the city every day saying, hey, we need to get them tagged and get them out.
A spokesperson for Mayor Ted Wheeler's office tells KGW they're aware of the ongoing camping issues on Southeast Knapp Street and have plans to place about 300 concrete barriers to stop homeless people like Shaughnessy.
This was my mom's dog.
From staying there.
Are you kidding? Oh my God, I never heard of that. That's crazy.
So we've been waiting for the last 3 months for these barriers to be put there, and we still don't have them.
City officials say they are still securing the funding and permits needed for those barriers.
Just do it. I'm tired of like hearing, we're gonna.
Why would they put all the money into doing that, into labor and the product, instead of putting the money to where it should go? Treatment for people that need it, or housing for people that need it.
There's a lot of good people out here that, you know, they need help.
We asked Mayor Ted Wheeler about the issue during KGW's Straight Talk.
First of all, we empathize with the neighbors. We support addressing this. Sometimes actually putting in the hardening, the barriers takes a little more time. We're aware of this particular site, and I'll make sure that I follow up personally with the people who run the program, the Portland Solutions program, and we will see where it is and get back to people. But I know that people are impatient and want these issues addressed. So do we.
A city spokesperson tells me the Portland Bureau of Transportation is monitoring the area. Over the past 6 weeks, they've done about 10 assessments, which means they've gone and looked at the site and done some light cleanup. They've also noted the return of more vehicles each time. It's unclear if any resources or shelter referrals have been offered to those staying there. City officials say they will continue to remove people camping there and provide updates as they can. And while we're talking about homelessness, the city of Vancouver is opening 2 new winter weather shelters this weekend, meant to help people living on the streets escape the cold. Our team went inside one of them today at the Vancouver Arts Hub building. This is the larger of the 2 shelters. Combined, they will offer about 55 beds and meals. And they're referral only, but it's all in an effort to keep people alive during the colder months. Celine Stevens is in the newsroom tonight. Celine, you got the tour today. Okay, it's great they're opening more shelter. We love that. But talk to me about how the surrounding community is responding to this.
Blair, so right next door to the shelter is Vida Elementary School, and some parents have expressed safety concerns recently, given there's no official security staff for the shelter. In a statement from Vancouver Public Schools, the district wrote that it plans to add more morning safety staff during student drop-offs for the first week. They also say they will install mesh on the fence between the buildings to enhance privacy and maintain dignity between both facilities. That being said, there is some support. The school is holding a clothing drive to help those in need at the shelter. Also, these shelters are temporary, remaining open through March. The city told me they also have 3 additional spaces to serve as severe weather shelters if needed in the future.
All right, Celine Stevens, thank you. And don't go anywhere. The story returns right after this. And before we go tonight, we wanted to highlight a few emails that came in this week. Let's first address this one from Carol last night, who wrote, "I'm so sorry to see this story turn into another ordinary news program with no viewer input. It has gone from actually receiving calls on camera to emails, and now you are just lecturing us." Well, geez, I hope it's not coming across that way, but Carol, don't worry. We will certainly be featuring viewer emails and voicemails on the show moving forward. Nothing is changing on that front. It's just some days and some stories get more of a response from our viewers, and we try to get your thoughts out there as often as we can. So look for more in the future. All right, this next one may be a little weird reading out loud about myself, but here it goes. Nancy told us, "Good for you, KGW, for choosing Blair Best as the new host for the story. Blair is smart, articulate, and seemingly unafraid of controversial issues. I will definitely miss Pat Joris, but Blair is an excellent choice in his absence." Nancy, I appreciate that, and I agree. I will also miss Pat. But your email made me smile. And speaking of smiling, John wrote to us last night, "I think tonight is the first time I've ever seen Blair Best smile." Okay, I know that most of my stories may not encourage smiles, which is why it was a little rare for me to smile on the air previously, but we'll be covering all kinds of stories here on the show in the future, and I'm sure some of them will deserve a smile. All right, that is the end of our show. Thanks for watching. I hope you can find a reason to smile this weekend. If you're watching live on TV tonight, Timbers 360 is coming your way next. And for the rest of you, be sure to stream the story on your own schedule if you miss our live broadcast each weekend at weeknight, at 6:30. Just download the free KGW Plus app, available now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV.